Hello and welcome to Chicago Newsroom 2.0. My name is Vaughn Bryant and I am excited to serve as your host. I've spent the last 20 plus years watching Sunday news shows like Meet the Press, Fox News Sunday, and others. If anyone had told my 10-year-old self that this is how I'd spend my time, I wouldn't have believed them. But here we are. I look forward to bringing you Chicago's newsmakers and those who report on the news as we analyze the week's top stories. We'll be right back with our first guest. Stay with us. Chicago Newsroom quickly became one of CAN TV's OG signature programs when it launched more than a decade ago. Legendary host Ken Davis interviewed the likes of Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle and the late Karen Lewis, and one of the first interviews with newly minted Mayor Lori Lightfoot in her office at City Hall. So I'm honored that Ken agreed to return to the show for the first time for my first interview. Thank you.
Agreed. There was no agreement. I had to. I had to be here.
And we greatly appreciate it.
So tell me, like you're telling everybody else, what? Here I am. See, I'm interviewing. So I can't help it.
Old habits die hard.
What's happening here?
What's happening here is that we honor the Newsroom program and wanted to bring it back in sort of a 2.0 fashion, and so I agreed to do it because
so cool.
I care about the news probably in the same way that you do, you know, I want to be a good steward of what you started and bring diverse community voices to the program.
And you decided to keep the name. That's really wonderful. Listen, you know what? I just wanted I wanted you to have this. This was like, you know, it's just something left over from the old days.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, nice. That's nice.
It's vintage. Yeah.
Let's leave this right here.
Leave it next to your CAN TV mug. Well, anyway, thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Definitely. So tell us about your pathway to CAN TV Newsroom.
I don't know that I actually remember it. It was what, like 12 years ago now. But basically what happened was my wife and I had been very concerned about, we both came out of news. We both worked at WBEZ decades ago and other news shops. And we were very concerned about the corporatization of media and the reduction of media in Chicago. So we pulled together a really large-scale event. It was a symposium that we held, and it was very well attended, and I don't know, it just kind of felt like a moment in time when the newspapers were really going through a lot of change, and radio was kind of disappearing as a news medium. Television everybody was in conflict, and after that, the folks at CAN TV reached out to me and said, we would really love to do a kind of a weekly news analysis show, and we were wondering if you'd be interested in doing it. I'd never considered it, but I said, yes, of course, and I just came over and started doing it and loved it and did it for 10 years.
Do you remember your first interview?
Yes, of course I do, yeah, it was Karen Lewis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, we had Karen Lewis and Ben Joravsky. At that point, those were three of the real kind of hot media people. Okay. And it was a really interesting discussion because you know, she was really moving onto the scene as a major force in Chicago. So that was kind of interesting.
And what about your favorite moments or favorite interview?
Oh, you know, there were just so many. I should have imagined you were going to ask me this so that I could have prepared an answer. But, well, I mean, I got to say, one of the things, something that I thought was a kind of a real favorite was the COPA, the Chicago Office of Police Accountability. They were having all of their preliminary meetings well, it was years ago now, but in the middle of the show somewhere. And Lori Lightfoot was the convener of it, and she was the big honcho. And I really felt that she was an intellect. I thought that she had a lot of thoughts about police and police accountability and how police should be deployed in a city like Chicago. And I approached her and asked her if she'd like to come on the show. And she ended up doing a series, I don't know how many it was, I think it was 3 full hours of just sitting talking about the relationship of police and big cities. And I was really impressed. I thought that, first of all, I was really grateful that she would come and do it. But I thought she did a really good job with it. And I think that had a lot to do, not her being on our show, but her presence and her position had a lot to do with her getting elected. And I think it's been very interesting to watch what's happened since then, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who have very strong opinions about what's happened vis-a-vis policing during her administration, which I guess goes to show that there's a lot of difference between being a kind of an academic and being the person out there who has to make it happen, has to formulate policies.
Absolutely. The position you hold, means your voice means different things.
Yeah.
So advice, as I go into, Newsroom 2.0, what would you advise?
Well, I'm not the guy to give advice because I was making it up as I went along, and our crew was at the same time. So I don't know. But what I would say is that I know this much for a fact. Chicago is just full of interesting people. I mean, just fascinating people. We're so lucky. We always think of it as being a drawback of some kind, but we have this incredible asset of having people from all over the world, of every imaginable origin, color, culture, and so many of them are just really interesting folks. If you can you have this luxury, and believe me, you'll find that this is true as time goes by. You have the luxury of having a 40-minute or a 50-minute or even a 60-minute conversation with somebody, and in the first 6 minutes you dispense with all the crap that get done on a regular news interview because they only have 2 minutes, right? So if you had Lori Lightfoot on today, you'd have to say, are you going to fire Brown? That kind of thing, right? So you get beyond that, and then you start unpacking what it is that makes people think about these things and how they come to these conclusions. So the real luxury is the time.
Yeah.
And if you got an audience that's willing to follow you and listen to it, I think that's a real benefit. And one of the things that was happening, just starting to happen in our time, was having the online presence. And when you called me and asked to do this, I just went and looked at the old Chicago Newsroom site, which I have studiously avoided for 2 years. I've never looked at it.
Right.
And I started thinking, it's like, well, there is a bit of a resource there. I mean, there's whatever it is, 10 years. There's almost 500 shows there. So somewhere in there's got to be something of value, and maybe I should mine that and start updating it or something.
Well, Ken, on behalf of the entire CAN TV family, we're grateful. Chicago is grateful, and we thank you. And we'll be right back for our first roundtable discussion. Stay with us.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Change Agents places a spotlight on critical issues impacting Chicago's communities, including homelessness, gender-based violence, food inequity, bail reform, hate crimes, police reform, school bullying, the list goes on. Each week, we'll introduce you to the community organizations and leaders who are working on the front lines to address and combat these issues. Join me for Change Agents, Thursdays at 7 p.m. on CAN TV19 and streaming live on cantv.org.
Welcome back. I am thrilled to be joined by this week's roundtable of pros, each weighing in on their picks of the top news stories of 2022. What was significant about it, and what are the implications for 2023 and beyond? And with us, we have Corley J. She's a news reporter with Crane's Chicago Business. LaForce Baker, he's the Vice President of Community Impact for World Business Chicago. Kathy Cheney is the Vice President of the National Association of Black Journalists. And Eric Johnson, City Editor at the Chicago Crusader. So we're gonna jump right in, and Kathy, why don't you tell us what your news story is?
Actually, Roe v. Wade, that has been devastating news for 2022, and I have 2 daughters. One is college age, the other one, I guess you could say she's college age, she's 24. And I'm just thinking about, them not having the option to say what can be done with their body, if something was to happen and they can't do what they want to do. So that has really, really impacted me, and I was really proud to see that a lot of college campuses had a lot of demonstrations, not just in Chicago, but in other states too, where the students are demonstrating like, no, bodily autonomy, this is my choice. You don't tell me what to do, because it's just, these are lasting decisions, and you can't tell someone what to do with their body. So I'm happy to see that there's still lively conversations, plenty of demonstrations coming out about this. And I mean, it's impacting everything. There are some students who are going into college next year that are basing their decision based on the decision of Roe v. Wade. So it's just like, okay, well, I can't go to this college that I wanted to because the laws, you know. Illinois, we're kind of good, you know, and we have out-of-state people coming over here, you know, because of that. But it's like, that's not everybody's story. So Roe v. Wade was the big thing for me, and I know it's going to continue in this year.
And Eric, you agree with her?
Oh, absolutely. I think it was just the impact of the story. From the moment that the story broke, that Politico broke the story, it was unprecedented with the draft that happened in May. And then in June, of course, that is when they went through with the Supreme Court went through with their final decision. But look how much it bled, you know, for the rest of the year into other stories, including the midterms, its impact, you know, on the election, you know, and it just stayed with us till the end of the year. I mean, everyone perhaps knows where they were doing, what they were doing when the story broke, when they found out that this unprecedented move of getting a draft from the Supreme Court, the nation's highest court, you know, never happened before in the 362-year history of the Supreme Court. It's the far-reaching. I've never seen anything happen like that before, you know. And of course, it's going to continue into 2023, perhaps even 2024. As we know, Illinois is sandwiched between two conservative states, you know. And there's, you know, talk about Illinois, even Chicago, being the epicenter, you know, of abortions, because people have to cross state lines in order for that to happen. It was just a huge story. It's just something that hit everyone out from left field. No one expected it.
And it's interesting you talked about the elections, you know, that came after, but even when you look back at the election of Trump, it's like Trump or Hillary, you know, this is why elections matter, and it's why you have to participate. Even if you don't like either of the candidates, there are implications for either sitting out or choosing what you think the lesser of the evils are.
Right, yeah, something that I definitely learned.
And that, you know what, and I just thought about something, that this decision has gone as far as there are some college campuses who have vending machines now with Plan B as an option in vending machines. So it's like a contraceptive like vending machine, but who ever thought about that before, that there would be a need for that? But Roe v. Wade, it's just like, okay, come on, let's do this. I mean, it's the impact. Just the impact.
Did either of you want to weigh in on this topic?
I did want to talk about something that we were talking about early, Kathy, about how pilots kind of got together to kind of build this network that flies people into Illinois to get safe abortions. I thought that was really cool.
It is, because it's just like, you see people banding together,
Right.
saying, you know, no, they have a choice. They should have a choice.
Yeah.
You can't do it here. We'll help you get to the place where you need to get it from. So, no, that was
Right, like shout out to the
community.
vigilantes.
Yeah, and you know, to me, you know, the thing that was most impactful about this is, you know, when does it stop? To me, like Roe v. Wade was like I think most people took it for granted as a fundamental right.
Yeah.
So it's like then it starts to be a slippery slope. Are we gonna now talk about, you know, recension of rights to vote, you know, for black people, for women, things like that? You know, it's just some fundamental kind of gains that we've had as a country that makes America America that, you know, you just wouldn't think would be challenged in 2022.
Absolutely.
Right.
So why don't you continue on with your story?
Yeah, so, you know, for me, you know, I'm the business person. So for me, my big story for 2022 was really the investment by Northwestern Memorial Hospital of $100 million in building an urgent care facility on the south side, their first one on the south side, south of Roosevelt, in the Bronzeville neighborhood. So essentially we're talking about 47th and Cottage, right next to the Walmart, much needed. You know, in our community, most folks, they have to go to the emergency room to get basic care. You know, otherwise you have to travel so far, you know, to get basic care if you have a, you know, a bruised knee or a cold and things like that, or you're going to a minute clinic at a Walgreens. You know, and so I think that it was huge to get a primary care facility bringing 100 medical professionals, because that's how many new people that will be hired. And then some much needed retail at the bottom. And you know, this is something that I talked about with the group beforehand, is the retail amenities at the bottom of that hospital is also needed. Right now, you know, most people on the south and west sides of the city have to travel outside of their neighborhood if they have a birthday or a promotion and they want to go to a nice restaurant. And so this also brings those types of amenities that's at the bottom that the jobs will support.
Right.
And so it's more than just the urgent care facility, but it's also kind of correcting the, you know, disinvestment over 50, 60 years in our community.
So two questions. One is, how long does it take for a deal like that to be made and come to fruition? And two, when you think about the additional services and business that'll come, how do those decisions get made? Is the community involved in what those businesses actually are?
It's a great question. So typically, an investment of this size, at the bare minimum for new construction, ground up, you're talking about 2 years. Also, typically, city council has to approve it, which can take another year to 2 years. So you're talking about 4 years. This process started about 3 years ago to get us to where we are today in terms of making the announcement last year. So, you know, now that the announcement's been made, in 2 years, we can, you know, actually see the fruits of the labor of it coming. When we think about the additional retail that will come as tenants, once we had that, that's the anchor. So, you know, when I talk to national retailers, and I talk to all of them, from, you know, the big box retailer like a Target to sit-down restaurants to fast food, you know, they want to know, number one, is there housing there that will support their businesses? Meaning, do you have density there? And they want to know who's working there. Obviously, if you're bringing 100 medical professionals there and support staff, that's a lot of people with decent incomes. You know, it makes it attractive for, you know, a whole host of retailers that we've lost in our neighborhoods, particularly over the pandemic. You know, it makes it easier to attract those types of retailers. So I'm talking to, you know, restaurants, I'm talking to, you know, smaller format grocery stores, you know, to bring more variety to our neighborhood. So, you know, you don't just have to go to a corner store to, you know, get your groceries, or, you know, you don't have to go to, you know, a place that just has unhealthy options. You know, now you have a base where you can have more diverse, you know, food options. We make sure that anything that we bring is influenced by the community. So, you know, we did the work of trying to attract them, but there was a lot of community listening sessions to make sure that people wanted this. We don't want to bring amenities that people are like, I didn't ask for that.
Right.
But most folks in the neighborhood don't know how to attract a large retailer. We know the metrics that they need to see to make it happen. So we made the pitch, and now it's happening.
Excellent.
What's the closest urgent care clinic right now? Do you know?
The closest urgent care clinic would be on, it would be further down 47th, but it's a small one. It's on 47th and Lake Park, and it has very limited hours.
Okay.
Whereas this one would be practically 24 hours.
Oh.
Excellent. Excellent.
cool.
Okay. Corley, how about your story?
Yeah, so my story, it comes out of 2021, but it really broke in 2022 with more detail. So the Chicago Bears and the Arlington Heights deal. So, you know, they got this agreement to buy the race course for $197 million. And then so you had Lightfoot kind of combat and say, you know, to get the Bears to stay, we're going to build a dome over Soldier Field. And that's going to be a better price tag, because I think for the total, it's going to be like $5 billion, which includes the stadium, building the stadium from the ground up. And then you have the multi-mixed-use development around the stadium, $5 billion. So the dome, it will be $2 billion. And so they're kind of using this as a way to get as a motive to get the Bears to stay, right? And the renderings actually came out on Sunday. You guys saw. And so it's going to be pretty cool. I think that it's going to add almost 9,000 seats, actually, to the stadium. But, of course, there's a backlash that came last year about taxpayers in Chicago and in Arlington Heights. So residents in Arlington Heights don't want to foot the bill for this stadium. Of course, the Chicago Bears say they're going to pay the majority, but they need help from taxpayers, and they haven't been upfront on how much that would be. And also, you know, we don't want to pay, Chicagoans don't want to pay for the dome because we're still paying for renovations from 2003, the Daley administration, when they did the renovations to Soldier Field. So it's like a lot of back and forth going on here.
And you
So
have to
when does a
disclose some
decision
numbers.
need to be made?
I am not sure. So Arlington Heights Village Board is actually, they're still trying to make sure they recoup whatever they give back. So that's what's kind of holding up the whole thing here. So we're trying to see. So this is actually going into this year, like we saw Sunday with this new video, the renderings and everything happening. It really be interesting to see the conversations that came out of it. Was like, would Chicago market be fit for 2 football teams? You know, with the news coming, Lightfoot was kind of like, you know, a lot of cities have a lot of 2 football teams, so that sparked debate with that. And then people calling them the Arlington Heights Bears. But
So the question I have is, if the Bears leave, how would they repurpose Soldier Field?
so before the Bears actually came to Soldier Field, it was used as a public park, which a lot of people have said that they would love to see that used for like different events and speeches. I believe Martin Luther King even spoke there. So it will be interesting to see what they do with it and what could come of it. Like, give it back to the people. You know?
Now it's still being used by the Chicago Fire.
It is.
Soccer team.
yeah,
So
that's true.
yeah, but I think there's still like the gut feeling is, you know, there's still doubts of whether the Bears franchise will actually move to Arlington Heights. There's some people still believe that it's a bluff. You know, that they're not going to follow through with it.
They had the
and
lease
then that
until
purchase,
2033.
that purchase agreement I think they had for $198 million.
Yep,
I think
97.
that probably, you know, got people looking more seriously. You know, that this may actually happen, but. It doesn't surprise me that this latest rendering comes as Lori Lightfoot is seeking re-election.
Oh,
you know,
yeah, that's
and
a
that
great
some people
point,
don't want. Some people are, you know, especially on the North Siders, don't want the Bears to leave, and that may cost Lori Lightfoot some votes.
Are people
So-
like really expecting the name to change?
Right, I don't know where that came
don't think so.
from.
Okay,
That is not
okay.
going to change.
There, I mean, if you think about the New York Jets, and there's plenty,
don't
or
play
even
in
the
the
Dallas
city, right?
Cowboys, they don't play in the city. That
Yeah.
they,
Even Lori
have the
Lightfoot
name.
herself suggested that you cannot name it Chicago Bears if you take it out of the city.
Come on now, be serious
Yeah,
though.
Yeah.
I don't
They're
think
not
it's
your
still
big.
good branding
And
for
you
Chicago.
remember when the
Right.
New England Patriots, when they left, you know, Massachusetts, and you know, there was some, you know, similar issues there, you know, concerns over, you know, about them relocating and not being part of Boston. And
So I have
and the whole
another
thing.
follow-up as well. The lease between the Bears and the Soldier Field, like, when is that up?
It's supposed to end in 2033, but they can leave as early as 2026 and pay out like $84 million to leave.
Okay, so that gives them plenty of time. And I think the other thing we need to know is that part of the reason the Bears can't get the Super Bowl is because it's a cold weather climate and they don't have a
we
dome.
don't have the dome.
So the reality is there is a lot of upside for the Bears if they do get Arlington Heights because they own it.
They own
and then
it.
every, you know, entertainment activity that comes, they get the revenue for that.
Right.
We
And
were
it's
kind of
bigger.
talking about the cold weather thing and the dome, the no dome, and I was
Right.
saying that's the reason why I wouldn't go to a Bears game beyond October is because we're in Chicago.
Right.
So the other conversation I want to kind of go back to a little bit is related to what LaForce was talking about. Can you talk a little bit about the Discover Call Center and talk about what that has done for the Chatham community?
Yeah, so, you know, essentially Target, they made the decision to pull out of Chatham, which was unfortunate. 100,000 square foot box, so it leaves a pretty large hole in the neighborhood. And so when they did that, you know, people were scrambling. Well, first off, people were upset. But then after that, people were scrambling to figure out how do you repurpose this? Because it's hard unless you find another massive retailer to take up that much space. And so, you know, I really credit the development team there, which is actually led by African-American man, Leon Walker, that redeveloped that building and sold it to Discover. Well, actually, he didn't sell it, he still owns it. So a black man is the landlord to Discover Financial for that repurposing. And that's gonna create 1,000 jobs over the next 3 years in Chatham. The thing I think is so cool about that is while, you know, it sucks to lose a big box retailer, the jobs that Discover is going to bring are much higher quality jobs and higher income jobs. You know, Discover is committed to making sure that anyone that wants to pursue a college degree, they can do it, you know, on Discover's dime. And so that's something that typically you're not seeing at a Target.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think it was a big boom for that area because I think it's about at least 2/3 of the folks in that center are from a 5-mile radius of the center.
That's
So they were very intentional about hiring. Most of these folks also never worked in a call center role. So this is an on-ramp into, you know, middle-class employment, you know, for our community, which we typically don't have those types of kind of like corporate office type amenities in our neighborhoods, typically downtown or in the suburbs.
And is this both the Chatham deal and the deal in Bronzeville a part of Lori Lightfoot's Invest Southwest initiative?
So just loosely, yes.
Okay.
You know, the Invest Southwest program has 10 specific corridors. And so you have the developments that's going on that we're actively tracking and making sure that those happen. That's $2.2 billion in development. But then you have the surrounding neighborhoods, or areas, which would include like that Discover Chatham, you know, because, you know, when you bring those other investment, it attracts follow-on investment in surrounding neighborhoods because now you have more amenities and you have more density. Most of the Invest Southwest programs brings more housing, and typically for a big box retailer or a large employer, they want to see density in terms of housing, then they will come. You can't build the store and then have the housing follow.
Right.
So Invest Southwest is bringing housing, is bringing infrastructure
Right.
for a large retailer because now they actually have, like in Discover's case, you have a Class 8 office space, which is what you need to even put a call center in the space. If that space doesn't exist, Discover can't even decide to move there. So I think it was a big win for the South and West Side.
You've got plenty of housing there. You've got a co-op and a large complex that's right on the other side of, you know, you driving up into the Discover Center. So the housing is definitely there.
Yeah, you have a strong black middle class in Chatham that are homeowners. So that made it attractive. And another thing that a lot of people don't know, there's a large density of African Americans with financial services backgrounds that live in Chatham. That was one of the key reasons why Discover made the reason to move there.
So quickly, before we close out in short order, your story for 2023. What are you following?
Very interesting.
Like just a couple of words, like what's the topic? Because we don't have a whole lot of time.
I think the mayoral elections.
Okay.
Definitely.
Kathy?
I really have to think about that because Roe v. Wade is going to continue on. The mayoral election.
Okay.
We were talking about it earlier. I'm like, I need to find out who's officially on the ballot first.
Okay. LaForce?
I would say this so-called like pending recession, are we having it? Because it will make it harder for development to happen on the South and West Side if we slip into a deep recession. People tend to pull back on investment when it gets tough.
And then Corley?
The affordable housing care package, the big package that Lightfoot and the administration announced last year, just following up to see how that's going this year.
Okay. So Kathy Chaney, Corley J., Eric Johnson, and LaForce Baker, thank you for joining me in my very first edition of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. I look forward to welcoming each of you back to the program in the coming weeks and months to come.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We'll be right back with a final thought. Stay with us. I've spent my entire career in some form of service. My work in Chicago includes building the Safe Passage program for CPS, serving as Chief Program Officer at the Chicago Park District, and currently working to reduce gun violence in the city of Chicago. I often say the people we serve are the people we need to create thriving communities. Society just doesn't work without engaged citizens at all levels. Well, that same thing held true for Southwest Airlines over the holidays. It would appear that the airline's leadership ignored countless warnings for over a decade of an outdated computer system. Southwest canceled over 2,500 flights across the country on December 27th, with Chicago Midway being one of several airports seeing at least 30% of their flights canceled. These cancellations were a major disruption to this holiday season. And in the same way that we need all levels of airline companies to work together to ensure safe and timely travel, we need all Chicago citizenry engaged in making Chicago the safest, most vibrant city in the world. I'll be back here again next week, amplifying and analyzing the news that matters to Chicagoans. Until then, good night.